following podcast contains explicit language. Hide your children. Hi, I'm Josh Levin, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of October 23rd, 2023. On this week's show, Slate's Ben Mathis-Lilley will be here to talk about allegations that the Michigan football team is running a big-time sign-stealing operation. We'll also ponder how the universe will change now that flag football is an Olympic sport. And ESPN's Greg Wyshynski will come on for a conversation about the National Hockey League's move to ban rainbow-colored pride tape and one player's decision to defy that ban. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm the author of The Queen and the host of the podcast 1 Year. Our season 1 Year 1955 is available, and you should listen. Also in D.C. is Stefan Fatsis. He's the author of the books Word Freak, A Few Seconds of Panic, and Wild and Outside. Hello, Stefan.
Hey, Josh.
What's up?
Nothing much.
Great. Let's talk some sports. A lot of folks have been wondering about where our friend and colleague Joel Anderson has been. And after this weekend's blowout, TCU lost to Kansas State, I can report that he's hiding in an undisclosed location, preparing a national campaign to fire Sonny Dykes. But other than that, I can say that he's been working on other assignments, but will be back with us very soon.
It's a good report. We miss Joel.
We do. All right, in our bonus segment for Slate Plus members this week, ESPN's Greg Wyshynski will stick around to talk about the NHL's latest, greatest phenom, Connor Bedard. How good is he? And will he be, like Wayne Gretzky better, something like that. To hear that conversation, you have to be a Slate Plus member. As a member, you get bonus segments on this and other Slate shows. You get ad-free listening on all Slate shows, and you get to support us. Slate.com/hangupplus to sign up. That's slate.com/hangupplus. Last Thursday, news broke everywhere that the NCAA was investigating the University of Michigan football program for the dastardly act of sign stealing. Michigan Athletic Director Ward Manuel said in a statement that all of us are committed to the highest standards of ethics and integrity, which is good enough for me. And yet, the investigation continues, and so must we. To adjudicate this controversy, we wanted to bring on an impartial observer, someone who can evaluate these claims fairly and dispassionately. Unfortunately, we couldn't find anyone, so instead we have our colleague/deranged Michigan fan, Ben Mathis-Lilley. Ben writes about politics for Slate, and he is the author of The Hot Seat, A Year of Outrage, Pride, and Occasional Games of College Football. Ben, welcome.
Hey, guys. I wish I was here to talk about Michigan's outstanding record and dominant on-field performance, but I suppose I will discuss this other thing with you as well.
Thank you for your generosity. The Athletic reported last week, and I quote from that story, Michigan is being accused of using a vast network to steal opposing team signs. The alleged evidence appears to suggest UM had knowledge of what play an opposing team was going to run before the play occurs. Reports also indicate that the guy in charge of this vast network has the improbable name of Connor Stalions. Please brief us, Ben, on what is going on here.
Okay, so here's what I know about the Connor Stalions situation. So what we know has been confirmed by various parties is that Michigan is under investigation. The investigation is being conducted by the NCAA. The allegation is not quite that they stole signs or that they knew what plays were coming, which is actually, as these articles get into, it's actually legal to stand on the field and look across the field at the other coach and coaches and players and try to figure out what play they're signaling in. That's like the guys holding up signs and waving their hands around on the sideline. You're allowed to do that. What you're not allowed to do is to tape those signals at other games. You're not allowed to send someone to other games to stare at the sideline, to scout in person, to try to figure out signals. So what Michigan is suspected of is that this guy, Connor Stalions, staff member, low-level staff member, somehow accumulated video footage of other coaches during other games and used that information to put together a kind of cheat sheet as to what they might be calling in the middle of the game. So that's what they're suspected of. The actual evidence for this so far is a little thin. It seems to be one of these things that other coaches on other teams had kind of heard Michigan might be doing, and so maybe he got turned in. They kind of went around the rumor mill that this guy was doing this. There's nothing as far as like a video that was found on his hard drive or whatever, or a footage of a Michigan guy guy in a Michigan hat staring at Ryan Day, and in his game, in Indiana or something like that. So that's what we don't have yet. But we do know the investigation is going on, and we do know that at least some people, other people in the Big Ten, believe that this was some sort of kind of like sinister conspiracy.
So are you allowed to watch television and gather information from that? I'm a little confused by the NCAA's rules. I assume this means like doing your own filming. Everybody watches tape of opponents for the next game. How could anyone be prevented from zooming in on the sidelines and trying to decipher some intelligence from what the coaches and assistant coaches are doing?
So that's the part that is a little confusing as well. As I forget what article mentioned this, but as everyone has learned in the last few days, and probably very few people knew before that, in college football, you're not allowed to scout. So like the traditional image of the scout is like the old timer who goes out on the road with the radar gun and goes to a game. That's against the rules as of 1994 because it was apparently that it was an effort to reduce the amount of costs that a team was expected to incur. So your schools with less money don't have the money to send out scouts. So, okay, we're just going to say no one's allowed to do that. So you're right. That is the rule. You're not allowed to do that. However, as you point out, every game is now on television. Coaches get all 22 tape of every game. You can look at that for signal. So the difference between what you could do legally and what you could do illegally would seem to be vanishingly small. I guess the advantage would be like you send someone to another game to hold up their phone, you're going to get a little better of a clearer and closer up picture at the hand signals. So that is one of the aspects of it. It doesn't seem like even if they did this, and I'm not saying they didn't, that it would have really yielded that much of a competitive advantage compared to what you're allowed to do. And according to lots of other coverage, not only now, but this has been written about in the past, apparently it's something a lot of teams do. They have a few people, one or two people whose job is, look at the tape and try to figure out what the signals mean.
Let's get into motivation here, Ben. There was a moment several years ago, which was documented in the book The Hot Seat by Ben Mathis-Lilley, where Jim Harbaugh was on the verge of being drummed out of town.
Yeah.
The Michigan football team had not had much luck against its traditional rival, the Ohio State Buckeyes. They had not made the college football playoff or come particularly close to it. And Jim Harbaugh had the indignity of having his contract basically reduced. He had to agree to a sort of lesser terms to even be allowed to stay. Then after all of that happened, the Michigan football team got a lot better, really much better. They made the playoff. This year, they are now currently the betting favorite to win the national championship. And according to ESPN.com's Pete Thamel, a source told ESPN that the Wolverines have used an elaborate scouting system to steal signals from future opponents since at least 2021. Around what year was it that Jim Harbaugh started to feel the heat?
That part of it would be there's a certain appeal to that narrative, right? That would be. I
did say it in a very sinister sounding way.
That would be very dramatic if he had chosen to do that, and this is what explained the turnaround. You're admittedly getting a partisan take on this part of the story. I don't really think that's what the team's recent success is attributable to. For one, this assistant, Mr. Stalions, has been with the team since I think 2016 or 17. As one of the articles noted, there's pictures of him standing next to former defensive coordinator Don Brown, who was let go by the team after just repeatedly allowing lots of points to all the other teams that played them. So, I guess you could maybe he perfected his system in the last couple of years and turned a corner and got this network really fully deployed. Or maybe it's like a fairly negligible part of, what contributes to victory. I will say, as a fan, speaking from a fan's perspective, it's been a little frustrating because you get these stories with some very hyperbolic, bombastic headlines, worse than the Patriots, worse than the Astros. And then you kind of get down to the bottom of the story and it says, like, an opposing coach told, ESPN or whoever, yeah, so we suspected them of this, and so we switched all of our signals this year and stopped using signals at all, or we did this and that. And these are coaches whose teams lost to Michigan this year by like 40 points. Michigan State on Saturday night, they actually had a guy run out to call in the play, like the backup to the backup quarterback or something. and Michigan still won.
49-0.
Yeah, 49.
As was the score of that game.
I think they're doing other things that have maybe had something to do with the results on the field. But that said, which is only
he sounds defensive, Stefan.
He does sound a little defensive.
I think we're getting closer to the truth.
I'm waiting for the words "witch hunt."
No. Here, I'm going to give you this. I think this actually speaks to, if they did it, and again, I don't know that they didn't do it. It would have been
OJ language.
So stupid. Like, I think that really emphasizes how dumb it would have been to do something like this that puts, if not vacated wins, then your reputation, like other people at the program, like that would have been, it just would have been very ill-advised to do something like this, given the kind of, I guess the expected return on investment.
And yet, low-level staffers in football programs are known to be hyper-aggressive. They like to please their bosses. They want to do whatever it takes for the success of the team. And Connor Stalions.
Are you going to read from his LinkedIn page, please?
Connor Stalions. I'm going to read from his LinkedIn page, and I'm going to give you a little more, too. Connor Stalions went to the Naval Academy, and he was in the Marine Corps. He was a captain in the Marine Corps, and he wrote, according to an old bio on his LinkedIn page that reporters were able to sleuth out. He attempts to employ Marine Corps philosophies and tactics into the sport of football regarding strategies and staffing, recruiting, scouting, intelligence, planning, and more. Among the skills that Stalions wrote about on LinkedIn were identifying the opponent's most likely course of action and most dangerous course of action, and identifying and exploiting critical vulnerabilities and centers of gravity in the opponent scouting process. And let's not forget what the Marine Corps motto is, Ben. Always faithful. He has simply transferred his allegiances from the Marine Corps to Jim Harbaugh. He is always faithful to Jim Harbaugh.
Perhaps one of the listeners can inform us on this, but I guess I wouldn't have thought of like hand signal deciphering as a core, competency of the Marine Corps.
Code breaking, come on, code breaking, the military.
It's true. I think of that as a more, it's like a more linguistic process. But I guess it, it's used as the same part of the brain, perhaps. No, I think you're right. I think this is like the most likely explanation. I think vast network and worse than the Astros. I think that those kind of takes maybe a little bit over the top, but I would not have a hard time seeing, like you said, a very gung-ho staffer doing a good job at something, wants to do an even better job, maybe is not familiar with the ins and outs of, the 1994 ban on in-person scouting, gets some friends or people he knows to help him out, send in some tapes. That part does seem plausible to me, and I think you're right. It totally speaks to like the kind of level of crazedness that is not only present, but is like cultivated among, low-level football staffers and high-level football staffers. Like, as you said, I mean, certainly the thing that Jim Harbaugh knew he was doing here was hiring a former Marine to sniff out centers of gravity and imposing, so he thought that was going to render an advantage to his team. And he was willing to take part in that at the very least.
There's a big feature in Sports Illustrated by Pat Forty in 2020 about a college football team that had developed a reputation and an expertise in sign stealing, that team being Clemson. And the story, Clemson did not participate in the story, understandably, but there's a lot of detail in there about how this is done, that you have teams of analysts and graduate students watching tape, and that other coaches are kind of annoyed and paranoid about it, and they go into, they do like a brief huddle instead of, signaling in the plays from the sideline, or they'll use armbands and all this stuff. And it was a kind of acknowledged, and it seems to me, based on the story, a little bit kind of celebrated part of Clemson's rise, that they used their vast resources, not to send scouts to road games, of course, because that's not allowed, but like having people in this boiler room basically watching sideline tape or in the press box or whatever's allowed. And then, Brent Venables, the then defensive coordinator, was also seen as like this savant in terms of deciphering signals. He's now at Oklahoma. First year that he was at Oklahoma, they were horrible on defense, but now this year they're good. So I don't know, maybe he forgot how to steal signs for for one season. But, what this kind of shows to me, Ben, is the really fine differences in how we discuss these things. If we had learned that Clemson had been under NCAA investigation for this, then all of the stuff in that story would have been seen as sinister as opposed to clever. Also, it reminds me of Spygate and the Patriots, where, what the Patriots did was in violation of NFL rules. They videotaped coaches' defensive signals, but it was because they were videotaping them from like a particular area. Like you were allowed to videotape things, but just like not in the exact specific way that they did. And then Congress gets involved and Arlen Specter is like calling in Roger Goodell. And so it's just these like really minute differences in terms of what you do or what you're perceived to do that, again, can make things seem a lot more sinister. And so if it turns out that Michigan did violate these rules, however kind of picayune and stupid they are, I think it shows that they were dumb. Like, there's so much that you are allowed to do that it seems like would give the exact same result, that they've now cast this like enormous shadow. I agree with you. Like, it seems like whatever advantages conferred upon them could be conferred upon any other team that did it the way that Clemson did, or did it the way that maybe Michigan should have did it if they in fact didn't. And so it just seems like a kind of self-own that they're bringing all this negative attention on themselves in a season when they're having just this tremendous amount of success.
But we just don't know, Ben, right? I mean, Stalions could have been the architect of what is not a terribly sinister campaign to, like, reach out to some alumni or friends in Indiana or in Ohio State and Columbus and ask them to maybe shoot some video from the front row during the games and text it to him. I mean, we just don't know what these violations at this point might entail, but you're right, Josh. It's absolutely idiotic.
In the worst possible case, it still doesn't seem like that big a deal, honestly. What's the worst possible case? That Jim Harbaugh hired this guy explicitly to do this and told him, this is the rule. We know what the rule is, but you should break it. And this is like specifically how you should break it. And here's like a slush fund of money that you can use. Like, that's like the worst possible case. And that wouldn't have conferred, I don't think, that much of an advantage. It would just show like a guilty conscience and like that they knew that they were breaking the rules.
Or, Ben, is this the NCAA going after perennial thorn in their side, Jim Harbaugh, who is suggesting that the NCAA should share its television revenue with players and other things that have annoyed the NCAA?
Yeah, I think that's another angle to it that is analogous maybe to in some ways to Bill Belichick. Belichick, another football coach who is both kind of admired and loathed in equal measure by fans, by his peers. And if I'm not mistaken, I think some of the reporting around not only the Spygate, but also Deflategate, another Belichick-related rule-breaking, alleged rule-breaking controversy, I think some of the reporting around that suggested that there was pressure on the NFL to investigate Belichick that was coming from other owners who were, maybe envious or suspicious of his success and felt that like he couldn't, there's no way he could be doing this on the level. That has some echoes to some of the quotes that we're seeing about Michigan and Harbaugh from anonymous opposing coaches right now. But yeah, so Harbaugh's relationship with the NCAA goes back to when he started at Michigan. He started holding these camps like for high school kids around the whole country, but especially in the South during the summer, which is kind of a creative way of basically doing a recruiting or publicity event without having to call it that and without having to follow the rules that are set up around when you can recruit players. And the NCAA cracked down on that. In fact, it was in response to complaints from some of the other coaches who said that they didn't want to have to work in July. After that, he's been for a couple of years advocating, laxer rules on player transfers, saying the players should be able to transfer if they want. This is something that the NCAA was opposed to until it wasn't. And then, yes, as of the last couple of years, he has been saying we have these big TV deals. We have NIL laws now that allow players to share in some of the revenue the sport generates. Why don't they get some money from the TV deals? Which is something, again, the NCAA still does not believe would be in accordance with its values of amateurism and so forth. The kind of cherry on top of this is the NCAA has already accused him of circumventing some other fairly administrative rules around when you can watch practice and which coaches can watch practice and when recruits are allowed to be at the schools. And that was why he missed the first 3 games of this season. That was a self-imposed Michigan suspension, which was in response to that accusation. But in the course of that, he was also accused of lying to the NCAA about what had taken place. And he said, I didn't lie. I'm not going to admit to lying. They're accusing me of lying. I didn't do this. So there is this backstory of this kind of hostile relationship between him and the league. That said, I do think we should be careful. Again, just as there's not any real evidence of a vast network, there's also not any evidence that the NCAA did this to spite Jim Harbaugh. So this is all speculation.
Somebody leaked the investigation to Yahoo Sports.
That is true. Although it could have been because the Big Ten heard about it and then told the rest of the opponents on their schedule, which I think actually is pretty fair. Hey, you might want to switch your signs because there's this investigation into whether Michigan is using tape to steal them. So it could be a spiteful move. It could be much ado about nothing. I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that there was no vast network and it was just one guy kind of working on his own. But I don't know. That's what makes it so fun.
I have some really good news for you, Ben. So what we learned from the Michigan basketball program is that when all of your records get taken away because of violating NCAA rules, as happened with the Fab Five, you still maintain a huge cultural relevance and prominence. So just don't worry about the national, even if the national championship gets just totally stripped from the record books, you can still think back on the season fondly. J.J. McCarthy's tainted Heisman, it'll all be just warm memories for you decades in the future.
Jim Harbaugh, renegade badass.
Up next, flag football in the Olympics. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Hey, listeners, whether you love true crime or comedies, celebrity interviews, news, or even motivational speakers, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue, right? And guess what? Now you can call the shots on your auto insurance, too. Enter the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. The Name Your Price tool puts you in charge of your auto insurance by working just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, then they'll show you a variety of coverages that fit within your budget, giving you options. Now that's something you'll want to press play on. It's easy to start a quote and you'll be able to choose the best option for you, fast. It's just one of the many ways you can save with Progressive Insurance. Quote today at Progressive.com to try the Name Your Price tool for yourself and join the more than 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Last week, the International Olympic Committee announced that 6 sports would be added to the program, with 2 M's and an E at the end, for the 2028 Summer Games in Los Angeles. Well, they said 5, but I'm counting baseball and softball separately. I mean, the balls are different sizes, let's be honest. But yes, baseball and softball are back. And in addition, you've got cricket, squash, lacrosse, and flag football. Yes, flag football, Stefan. How do you feel about this American gym class staple coming to the Olympics? And could dodgeball be next?
I would love to see dodgeball in the Olympics, Josh. I do like that you spelled out program. You'll be getting a job offer from Lausanne soon. Baseball and softball are back only because they are in the United States. U.S. Lacrosse, kind of the same thing. The United States, Canada, and Haudenosaunee, the 6 Native American nations known as the Iroquois Confederacy, finished 1-2-3 in the Men's World Championship this summer. Squash, total banger of a sport. Good chance for Egypt to rack up some medals. They won just 3 in 2016 and 6 in 2020. I've done my homework. But right now, Egyptian squash women are ranked 1, 2, 3 in the world, and squash men are 1st and 3rd. All right, so this is obviously the NFL flexing to get more people in Africa and Asia to buy Patrick Mahomes jerseys. Internationalizing the sport goes way back, farther even than the World League of American Football in 1991. In 1974, I learned from Wikipedia, the National Football League announced the Intercontinental Football League with teams in Istanbul, Rome, Munich, Berlin, Vienna, and Barcelona. Istanbul is in Asia. That didn't happen, but you had the WLAF, then you had NFL Europe, NFL Europa, the World League in various iterations through 2007, RIP Hamburg Sea Devils, Scottish Claymores, and of course, all of those preseason and now regular season games in Europe, Mexico, Japan. But the Olympics is the holy grail. This is not, at least from a marketing perspective, Ben, dissimilar to David Stern and the NBA lobbying to get Bird and Magic and Michael into the 1992 Olympics. And if the NFL, and this is clearly like not a done deal in terms of who's going to play, but this will be huge for the NFL, which has been a proponent of flag football, especially for girls and women.
Yeah, I think that that's maybe an element of it that the NBA, the NBA push didn't have, is that the NFL, and specifically it's led by Troy Vincent, a former player and league executive, has been, let's say, very assertive in promoting flag football, and not only promoting it, but in some of the teams in paying for leagues to be started around the United States, which has been a component of its response to publicity around CTE and concussions. So it's a PR play on some levels by them. On another level, it is in accordance with, as far as I know, what doctors are saying, which is that if you are going to play tackle football, you definitely shouldn't do it until you're well into your teen years. And so before that, if you want to play football, you should play flag. So yeah, I happen to I live out here in New Jersey in a community that has one of these NFL funded flag football leagues. And it's it's fun. It's exciting. Like, they definitely are paying for everyone to have like the team logos and the cool looking jerseys, and it's like very sharp, and it's fun to watch in person when a 13-year-old that is playing in it. I don't know whether it's going to pop on television for an international audience in the same way.
I don't really agree with your take, Stefan, for a couple reasons. Number one, I think the difference with the NBA players and going to the Olympics is that most countries in the world play basketball, and so the international play there was obviously paramount. Expanding the footprint of the league was something that was, number one on David Stern's agenda for a really long time. And having, these cultural and not just sports superstars on this huge global stage, that totally made sense. For the NFL, I think that having flag football in the Olympics is as much a domestic play than it is an international one. I think Ben made, one of the points about the league sponsoring a lot of these youth flag football leagues around the country. And this is clearly an attempt, the NFL's kind of push for flag football, to get more kids involved in the sport at younger ages at a time when playing tackle football, rightly so, is seen as a bad idea for most Americans. And you not only have, and we're not just talking about boys here, girls flag football has kind of exploded in popularity at the behest of the NFL in recent years. And that similarly seems to be a play that, this is not a sport that's been inviting to women, both as participants and I would argue as viewers. This is a way to get more women participating in the game and watching the game. And I think we can talk about who may or may not be playing in the Olympics, but women's flag football will be in the Olympics too. And that to me seems like it could be just as popular for viewers as the men's sport, especially if NFL players aren't in the Olympic flag football event.
Yes, I agree. And I don't think I said anything that disagreed with what you just said, Josh, because the NBA at the time, yes, people played basketball, but the NBA's international footprint was minuscule. There were so few international players in the league. If you lived abroad, you had to sort of get these samizdat VHS tapes of games and highlight compilations. This was not a sophisticated operation. The NFL has tried for, decades now to expand attention to the sport overseas. So yeah, you're right. Not as many people play overseas, but as a marketing vehicle, the NFL views the international world as potential revenue. Girls flag football, yes, is grown in part because the NFL wants to generate more fans, wants to make mothers and other women believe that the sport is safe. And also for Title IX reasons, flag football is an excellent way for high schools and colleges even, and I think that's where this might be going, to add more sports for women and get women participation numbers up as a way to protect tackle football and the huge rosters that they have.
I would throw in here just, not to necessarily disagree with any of the points we're making about kind of the top-down aspects of this and the NFL sponsorships of it and the maybe less than peer reasons they have. But, I think one thing we should also recognize is that as you alluded to, like flag football and touch football is like, it's a part of American culture and it's fun.
Sure.
So, it's not as if they have to trick people into playing this, especially on the girls side of it. It's kind of, it's an opportunity that didn't exist before. And I think probably the reason that like a lot of the teenagers and kids that are participating in it is because it's like, it's fun and it's an extension of what you would be doing on the playground anyway. And so I'm just kind of curious as someone who, as a football fan who also, has read all this reporting and shares the reservations that a lot of people do about what it does to your head, I am curious how big it can go. Like I said, I enjoy watching it. I'm not sure if it's the kind of thing that people are ever going to want to watch on the same scale as tackle football. This would be kind of an interesting way of seeing whether like there is a future for it, as a spectator sport in America. Obviously, as a participatory sport, I think it's on pretty solid footing.
I mean, we should note that flag football is often used as a pejorative by football knower-abouters, especially around rules to protect quarterbacks in the NFL. They should just be playing flag football out there.
Just last week, Tom Brady, in complaining about NFL officiating, kind of dissed flag football. He said there's so many people that want the NFL less and less physical. It's more like flag football, which is going to be in the Olympics in 2028. At least he was up on the news.
There you go.
Maybe football goes to flag football over a period of time. Hard to tell if Brady is a mole for the NFL and flag football or a critic there.
But there was this ESPN feature on the rise of girls flag football, which noted that the growth has been quicker in high school than in college. But there was some speculation in the piece that I found interesting about could there someday be women's flag football in the SEC? Like you have the kind of tribalism, you have the infrastructure. Maybe it could be like how there was all this resistance in Europe and in the Premier League to having women's teams, or, even with Barcelona and Madrid, to having women's teams associated with those clubs. And then as soon as it happened, as soon as the resources got poured in, you have tens of thousands of people wearing the jerseys and getting excited to watch those teams. So I thought that was interesting. And the NFL, like the quarterback of the Mexican team, Diana Flores, was featured in a Super Bowl ad. And I was surprised to learn, and this is kind of support for my take about the women's tournament being interesting and potentially getting a lot of viewers in the Olympics, that in the World Games in 2022, the Mexican women's flag football team beat the United States 39-6 in the gold medal game.
Why would we be surprised?
Unacceptable. Yeah. I've just learned about that result, but I'm furious about it, and I hope someone was dismissed.
Why am I surprised? Because the United States is really good at football and other countries aren't. That's maybe why I was surprised.
I don't know. Mexico's kind of into football. Here's what I would like to see happen here. The NFLPA and agents and owners don't let NFL players play in the Olympics in 2028 in flag football.
Robert Edwards, they'll say.
We send a bunch of D3 guys. They lose to, like Denmark. And then in 2032, Dream Team takes the field. Redeem Team. Patrick Mahomes, 37 years old, that quarterback.
So Robert Edwards famously, or perhaps not famously, tore up his knee, the Patriots running back, in a flag football game connected to the Pro Bowl. And there has been a lot of speculation on both sides Ben. You've heard Tyreek Hill, Rob Gronkowski, and the like say, we're there, 2028, let's do it. And then Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk says, like, agents have no interest in having their players do this. The NFL will not have any interest in paying players their full salary if they get hurt. And so the NFL, clearly has an interest in having stars. NBC has an enormous interest in having these star players, and the ratings would be huge. But it definitely seems at this moment, I actually don't know what's going to happen. Do you have any prediction on whether the Tyreek Hills of the world will be in the 2028 Olympics?
I like Stefan's scenario. I do think that what you might probably end up with, and this is something Florio floated, is guys who are on the kind of the periphery of rosters or are recently retired. So like a bit of like the kind of USFL or minor league football, the XFL phenomenon, where it's going to be maybe you're like Johnny Manziel-esque people who with the kind of household name recognition, but not like I really don't think as much as I would love to see it, I can't picture something like that getting figured out in a.
But given this rollout, I mean, the headlines have been Tyreek Hill. The headlines have been NFL stars. Like, that would be a disappointment, I think, to the league, to NBC, which has an enormous. I mean, NBC like kind of runs the Olympics in a lot of ways.
So what's a flag football roster? 12 players for the Olympics, 5 on the field at a time. It would not be difficult to assemble a roster of familiar names, even if they're not currently playing in the NFL, some of whom would still be young enough to be really good. The part 2 of that, though, Ben, is like, would NFL players necessarily be good at flag football? The best player in the U.S. national team right now is a 5'7" guy who never played college football.
Daryl Hoosh-Doucette of New Orleans, baby. Went to St. Aug.
Yeah. New Orleans in the house.
Forget Tyrann Mathieu and Leonard Fournette. This guy, Daryl Hoosh-Doucette. That's who we need to be celebrating.
I'm going to bring some personal firsthand knowledge into this, which is that in something like, 2006 or something, I played in a flag football tournament in Roswell, New Mexico, where my
against a team of aliens.
Where my dad was raised, and there were many divisions. I was competing in one of the lowest, and in the top division, there were actually a number of college players, including some from the University of Oregon, who were like, I think using this as kind of an off-season training thing. They went around to some of these tournaments and they were like running University of Oregon plays, and it was really cool, actually. So my guess is, if you get a guy like Lamar Jackson or Rob Gronkowski out on the field against, the Estonians, I think they're going to do pretty well.
So the U.S. has won the last 4 gold medals at the Men's International Flag Football World Championship. But the last 3 were close games, 33-32 over Denmark, 19-13 over Austria, and 44-41 over what we're learning is a flag football international powerhouse, Mexico. Austria beat the U.S. in 2012. So I kind of feel like if you add like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson and Joe Burrow, if we just put the 2019 LSU offense out there, I don't think the best players that Austria could assemble would have that much of a chance, but maybe I'm being ignorant. I do feel like one thing that I have not heard anyone say that is definitely true that will happen, because the joke is, and Brett Coleman said this on Twitter, I quote from him, the thought of Jamar Chase running a 9 route against a Lithuanian elementary school teacher in the Olympics has me dying. What will definitely happen is that the other teams will be composed of Americans. Just like in the World Cup, where the team from the Philippines was like all American players. It'll just be Americans who have some connection to that country. That's what's going to happen.
There'll be a lot of people finding their roots. There'll be a lot of guys who are hoping to make a roster that fall, suddenly discovering that they have a real deep connection to Denmark.
All right, Ben, we've gone through this whole segment without you making the joke that you promised me you were going to make 6 times in this segment. So, I would like to set you up gracefully, but, we can't have you leave without you, saying what you've been prepared to say.
What this means is we're going to find out, as is always asked during the World Cup and the Olympics, what if our best athletes played football?
Ben Mathis-Lilley is the author of One Joke and of the book, The Hot Seat. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, guys.
Up next, the NHL banned Pride Tape but one player has defied that ban.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. How do you know when to seize the moment for growth? When your opportunity arrives, you need to be ready. From expanding into new markets to hiring, business leaders face so many tough decisions.
My name is Brooke Clark. I'm the VP of Business Transformation and Strategy at Ember Technologies, a temperature control brand.
In 2016, Ember launched its core product, the Ember Mug.
The feeling of drinking out of an Ember mug is like nothing else. The coffee or tea will maintain that exact temperature for the entire length of your drinking experience.
Since then, the company learned how to pivot and grow in unexpected ways. And with SAP tools, they knew they were ready.
A few years ago, Ember had an opportunity to launch our products with a global electronics retailer. The tricky part of it was that we would be expanding to 27 countries around the world. It was a massive undertaking, not just due to hitting launch dates and timelines, but also given the intricacies of meeting product compliance in all those new countries. We only had a few months to get prepared for this rapid growth. We had to very quickly make changes on a fundamental level with our systems, our e-commerce, all of the integrations, the cloud-based systems that we put in place in order to facilitate the expansion into 27 countries has continued to benefit us to this day. In order to be ready, you have to have the right processes in place so that when the moment presents itself, you can seize that moment.
Ember Technologies seized the moment for growth. Will you? Head to sap.com/be ready to learn more.
Apple Card is the credit card created by Apple. You earn 3% daily cash back up front when you use it to buy a new iPhone 15, AirPods, or any products at Apple. And you can automatically grow your daily cash at 4.15% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank USA. Member FDIC. Terms apply.
On Saturday night at Mullet Arena in Tempe, Arizona, in a 2-1 win over the visiting Anaheim Ducks, Arizona Coyotes defenseman Travis Dermott wrapped the top of his stick in rainbow-colored Pride tape, which was created and marketed to show support for LGBTQI plus people and causes. Dermott's modest gesture, however, defied National Hockey League rules. Earlier this month, the league banned the use of the tape. It was a follow-up on the league's ban in June of specialty warm-up jerseys, including Pride-themed jerseys, after several players refused to wear them during team or league events. Joining us now, it's ESPN's senior NHL writer and our friend Greg Wyshynski. Hey, Greg.
Hey, boys. How are you?
Greg is also the host of The Drop, an ESPN podcast and YouTube show that you should all subscribe and listen to. Great to have you back. The founder of Outsports, Sid Ziegler, wrote after Dermott's Pride tape display that this was a total disaster for the NHL. Can you explain what happened and what is likely to happen after the Pride tape use?
Well, the ban of Pride tape, as you said, was sort of a clarification that the NHL made after the specialty jersey ban in June. They sent a memo out to their teams before the season to give them more guidance on these bans about theme night celebrations, and basically said that, you know, any alteration of the uniform, be it jerseys or gloves or skates, your stick, was also covered under this ban that stopped teams from wearing specialty jerseys in practice or warm-ups or during games. And basically, the Pride tape part of it was specifically called out because the league told me that they saw it as a, quote, end around to violate the new uniform policy that as you mentioned, specifically was inspired by the player boycotts of Pride Night last season. So the fact that Dermott used the Pride tape on his stick kind of pushed the envelope a little bit, pushed the boundaries a little bit to see how the NHL would react was pretty big news. And as far as what the fallout's going to be, none of us know. I mean, the NHL over the weekend said that they didn't expect there to be any addressing of it from hockey operations. Doesn't mean there won't be this week. The Coyotes hadn't heard anything as of Sunday as far as any punishment or anything like that to the team or to Dermott. So we'll see what happens here as far as enforcement of this policy.
I mean, for folks who haven't been following this since, I guess, last season, I think people will be surprised to hear that a North American sports league has not only said you don't have to wear a Pride jersey, you don't have to put Pride tape on your stick, but has said affirmatively, you are not allowed to do these things. You are banned from doing this, even if you want to. That is a step that I think no other league has come even close to taking. And so I guess if we could rewind, you guys have mentioned that some players objected to wearing the Pride jerseys, but how did we get here to a position where the NHL was saying you cannot, by any means, it is banned, no Pride, anything on your jersey or your stick?
Well, the NHL basically took both the path of least resistance and most resistance, I guess, to address this problem that they saw as a problem. It all started with defenseman Ivan Provorov of the Philadelphia Flyers, who became the first NHL player to opt out of wearing a Pride Night jersey during warmups. He basically boycotted warmups and stayed in the locker room until the skate was over. Pride Nights have been going on in the NHL for quite a long time in support of the LGBTQ plus community. Provorov later after the game cited his Russian Orthodox beliefs as the reason he opted out. And the Flyers and the NHL did not punish him for any of this. So that kind of opened the door for other players around the league to cite personal beliefs or religious dogma to then also boycott participating in these Pride Night activities. The Russian factor in this can't be ignored. Obviously, the politics of the gay community in Russia right now, it's a hot button issue, and a lot of these Russian players kind of cited that in their uncomfortability in participating in Pride Night activities, whether that's right or wrong. So you had teams with prominent Russian players like the New York Rangers and Minnesota Wild, for example, that decided not to have any of their players wear Pride Night jerseys and warm-ups last season, just to kind of like get ahead of whatever controversy might exist if their players opted out. So as a reaction to all of this, in June, NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman announced that all specialty jerseys would no longer be worn in warm-ups or in games. And that includes for things like Hockey Fights Cancer, Latino and Black Heritage Nights, things of that nature to go along with those Pride Nights. And basically it was decided that it's kind of an all or nothing scenario. It was a hugely controversial decision because not only are you talking about not allowing players who support these causes the chance to do so in ways that they had done for several seasons, but also, these jerseys for various causes were auctioned off after games. And the 6 that were wrapped in Pride tape were auctioned off after games. And, while teams can still make these jerseys, the players can't wear them. And I think all of us know that there is a difference between a player-worn, game-worn jersey and one that simply exists with a player's name on the back. So it did impact the financial gain for some of these organizations as well, at least in theory.
You said that this was controversial. Cowardly seems to be the correct word to apply to the NHL and Gary Bettman here. I mean, he issued very carefully, lawyerly crafted statements about how the intent was to eliminate the distraction so that we could focus on the events themselves, which is an end around to what is a public ban on support for gay athletes, children, people, community, full stop. And it was also a reversal for the league. Pride tape was a big part of Pride Night celebrations. The NHL sold Pride tape, and Pride tape was the product of a Kickstarter that began in 2015 to support gay rights and gay causes. The NHL sold Pride tape in its official league shop. So this reversal just feels so awful on the part of the league. So spineless.
So their pushback on that is that the nights themselves still exist. There are Pride Night celebrations scheduled for a lot of teams this year. There are still Hockey Night Fights Cancer, Black and Latino Heritage Months celebrations, military appreciation, which is another thing that was banned in the specialty jersey ban. All of these things still exist, is the NHL's pushback. And they also are very generous in their donations to all these causes. The NHL still donates to, Pride charities, for example, despite not having these players wear these jerseys anymore. So that's the pushback on it. Now, the problem for the league is they're really trying to have their cake and eat it too at this point. They have made a concerted effort to push this idea that hockey is for everyone. It is a plank in their marketing platform. They have developed coalitions and committees within the organization to try to bridge the gap between their sport and communities that feel like they're not welcome in that sport. So the idea that they're trying to do that while at the same time taking a visibly step back from supporting these causes, I think is really tough to square for a lot of people, and rightfully so.
I mean, it's also super disingenuous, right? Like getting rid of the jerseys for the other theme nights, it's just clearly collateral damage because they wanted to get rid of the Pride jerseys. And they're making some argument about how, we're not going to just have any of these for some whatever bullshit reason that they gave. And it's all just about the Pride jerseys. Like if they really wanted to be honest and own it and say something that, if not defensible, would at least be logical, they could say some players weren't comfortable with these. And after consultation, I don't know if this is true. This is hypothetical. You can tell me if this is true. After consultation with the Players Association, we decided that we're not going to put the pressure on players as a group to have to wear these jerseys. And so, we just decided that in this one case, we're not gonna do this anymore. Like they don't want to be honest about what it is they're doing and why they're doing it.
And they don't even want to be honest, Greg, if the answer is that we want to protect Russian players in the league and their families from any backlash back home. They could say that. I mean, it is a sensitive subject. Brittany Griner was detained by Russia for months, in part probably because of her sexuality.
Yeah.
So I understand that there may be issues here. I mean, if they are hidden in sort of arguments of bigotry or religion, that's another story. But the NHL hasn't attempted to explain the decision to do this in any sort of factual way that way. Is there a reason for that?
Well, I want to take a couple of things here that you've said. First of all, the league has staked out territory on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, okay, which is that they're very against it. They cut financial ties with certain Russian media companies. They stopped airing games in Russia. One of the reasons we haven't had a World Cup of hockey again in the National Hockey League is because they don't quite know how to involve the Russians, because you have countries like Finland and Sweden, for example, that are outright outraged to the idea of there being a Team Russia involved in that competition. So the idea that they would then say we are kowtowing to the homophobia of the Putin administration is probably also one of those, how do we square that, without looking like a bunch of hypocrites. The NHLPA was, I wouldn't say consulted on the jersey ban, but they certainly didn't object to it. But they certainly did not know about this next step coming with regard to the Pride tape. And so that kind of caught them by surprise. And I know that they're kind of waiting to see how things are going to shake out and what this policy actually looks like in practice before maybe figuring out their next steps. The other thing I wanted to mention was about going after the Pride Nights in particular. I completely agree. Like, this is a Pride Night issue. This is not someone opting out of wearing a Latino Heritage Night jersey. Okay, it was a Pride Night issue, and they should have addressed it as a Pride Night issue. Instead, they wanted to kind of cover their own asses by making this total ban on specialty jerseys, so it didn't look like it was just a Pride Night issue, but of course it was. And so the thing that the NHL has told me time and again since this ban went into effect on background is this notion of if you still allowed players that supported the cause, like Travis Dermott, for example, and like Connor McDavid, for example, the biggest star in the league, who has openly talked about how he doesn't agree with this policy. If you allowed them to skate in pride jerseys and made it more voluntary, you would still have the players who didn't participate witch hunted and called out by fans. And I don't agree with it, man. I think that the issue here is that it was a quote unquote mandatory thing that these players boycotted last year. And that's why they were singled out. They were boycotting pride. That's why they were singled out. If you made it a voluntary thing, personally, and being in the fan community like I am, I think you're going to see more people celebrating the players that are supporting these causes than calling out the ones that didn't. And I think the NHL is fundamentally wrong in how they think this thing would play out if they just got rid of the specialty jerseys Pride Night and allowed players to do it on an independent basis without making it mandatory.
So in the National Women's Soccer League, there was a player for the North Carolina Courage named Jaylene Daniels who refused to wear a Pride jersey. This was many years ago now, I think 5 years ago now. And she had been called into the U.S. women's national team. She was maybe once after that, but her position with the U.S. women's national team, it seems, was affected by this decision. She has since refused to play in a Pride Night match for her team. And she is kind of seen by a lot of fans, including of her own team, as somebody that they will never root for, never support. And she, I think, is the only player that I know of in this league that's taken that position. And I guess the hockey players could argue, like, what happened to Jaylene Daniels? That's what would happen to us. But, like, should we be coming up with policies to protect these people? I mean, I guess, again, the argument would be we're hockey players. Like, we're not, out here. We didn't sign up for the NHL because we wanted to express our views on this issue. I don't have a tremendous amount of sympathy for that position, but I feel like they would point to this Jaylene Daniels issue and say, this woman who, like, much of the soccer community now hates, like, that's what would happen to us.
I mean, that's why, as we were talking about earlier, like, the idea of if you do have a selection of players in the league that, object to Pride Nights on a religious basis, if you do have a number of Russian players that are legitimately worried about images of them wearing Pride jerseys going back to the Kremlin and what that could mean for them and their families, like, these are legitimate concerns. And if the NHL doesn't feel comfortable with these players being called out for boycotting these events, if they wanted to make it, not allow teams to make this mandatory, I mean, that's fine. But like you said, though, the fundamental problem here is that if you're trying to be a league that's supportive of this community, and then you restrict anybody from supporting it on the ice, then what are you really doing? like I've written several stories since this happened, and I can't tell you how many gay fans have expressed their fundamental disappointment and how crushed they are by the league backtracking and being seen as backtracking because of the pressure from homophobes. Like, that's how that community feels. And so, to me, that's the more so than anything else than the professional repercussions for what these people believe. For me, it's the fundamental problem with the league right now, that they've tried to establish this notion of you're welcome here, you're welcome at these games, where we want to make this for you and have you be hockey fans and be part of the family, while at the same time being like, except if this person or this person or this person has a problem with your lifestyle, in which case the things that we were doing to court you and make you feel comfortable, we're no longer going to do.
San Jose head coach David Quinn said, I unequivocally support using Pride tape. Several players have come out and said that they're going to do it too. I'll use the tape. If I have to buy it myself, I will, said Flyers forward Scott Lawton. This is has the potential to just spiral, as Sid Ziegler of Outsports intimated, into a really bad PR look for the league. What do you anticipate happening? Do you see more players stepping up and putting this little 3 inches of tape on their sticks as if that's somehow some gigantic threatening message to the sanctity of the NHL? Can this build and lead to the NHL reversing course here?
One of the things I'm curious about, to be honest with you, and you mentioned Gary Bettman being lawyerly in his comments, and it certainly has been the case in his comments for the last 3 decades, is whether or not there's nuance between the players using Pride tape in a random game, as Dermott did, or using it on a specialty night, as Pride Night is coming up this Friday, actually, for the Arizona Coyotes. The NHL is pretty adamant about the, changing of uniforms and equipment on a specialty night. And I don't know if that extends to other nights or not. So maybe there's a little nuance there that they're playing around with. But the answer is that, like, I don't know what they do. I've had some people in the league, or not in the league, but around the league, speculate that it could be the teams that are punished versus the players, that it's seen as more of a uniform or equipment violation, in which case the team might get the fine versus the player, kind of, making it seem less like the league is going after an individual and more like the league is asking its teams to police themselves. That's one theory. But I honestly don't know where the Pride tape thing goes, because, you can mandate that teams don't make specialty jerseys or don't make their players wear them, and they'll probably not, they'll probably acquiesce. But trying to get individual players to not use Pride tape or do the things that they've done through the years to support these causes is a whole nother situation. And I truly don't know how the NHL is going to approach it, because it is going to look like they're going after individual players, for their beliefs, which, as we were talking about earlier, seems very counterintuitive to their mission, which was to, placate the beliefs of a certain subset of players by creating an entirely new policy to satisfy them. So if you're going to, defend the beliefs of those players, but attack the beliefs of these players, then you've created an even bigger problem for yourself.
Yeah, and I just, I think the NHL comes out looking like FIFA here, which banned the, rainbow armbands in the World Cup. And if the NHL is giving us these mixed messages about, oh, we support inclusion, we believe in inclusion, I think their actions here expose that maybe they want to do that, or maybe they want people to think that. But what are we supposed to believe if you not only, it goes so far beyond coddling individual players when you tell people they actually can't express this, even if they want to, that anything that they say about their values and what they espouse just seems like totally hollow, because there's nothing behind it.
So first of all, every professional sports league should strive to not be like FIFA or the IOC. like that should be your baseline goal as a sports league. Don't be like either of those organizations. The pushback from the NHL on what you just said would be the idea that they are simply saying, don't support these causes on the ice. Keep the emphasis on the game. They've never,
as opposed to when they said a few years ago, you should support the causes on the
correct
ice.
during the bubble, when they famously every team tweeted out something about Black Lives Matter, and then didn't tweet out a thing about it after that week. Yes, we all remember that. Their pushback would be that they are still encouraging teams and players to support these causes everywhere but the ice surface and the practice surface. Like that's their pushback on it, is to say that they're not trying to silence players, they're not policing them. You can go to represent organizations and do charity work and all of these things. You just can't do it during the course of a game. Now, again, I think it's pretty logical to say that a lot of players aren't going to be happy with that. I think that they've supported these causes in Dermott's case, for example, because he's got gay members in his family. That's why he started using the Pride tape back in 2021. It wasn't simply for some nebulous support of a cause. It's because the cause was personal to him. And so, the idea that these players can't have that level of personal expression anymore to support these causes is really troubling.
Greg Wyshynski, senior NHL writer, host of The Drop. listen to him, read him, watch him on YouTube, consume as much Greg as you can. Greg, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me again.
This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Prize Picks is a skill-based, real-money daily fantasy sports game and by far the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, it's just you against the numbers. You just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. And with the Prize Picks reboot policy, your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance. Go to prizepicks.com/hangup, all lowercase, and use code HANGUP for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/hangup. Use code HANGUP for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy.
Now it is time for Afterballs, sponsored by Bennett's Prune Juice, endorsed by Kenny Sailors, who says, it was okay. All the way back in 2004, Stefan, I was working at Slate then, and I wrote a piece that began this way. Paul Arnold is the best quarterback in college football history. What? You haven't heard of Paul Arnold? Over his 10-year career, Arnold won 4 national championships for 3 different schools and was a 9-time All-American. And he didn't just call the plays, he drew them up too. The Paul Arnold offense, an intricate system of quick passes and design laterals, proved nearly impossible for defenses to slow down. Bruce Maurer, a former NFL official, says the quarterback/offensive guru reminded him of a hybrid of Roger Staubach and Bill Walsh. Maurer says there'd be times when your mouth would just drop open. All right, good first paragraph. The piece then went on to note that, and I continue quoting myself, no player could match Arnold's dominance of the flag football record book. He first took the title at the University of Florida in 1989, beating his frat brothers in the finals. I defected, Arnold admits. I had a gift, and I had to play with the best players available. As Arnold entered medical school at the University of South Florida and thus prolonged his flag eligibility, he added another championship, then 2 more as a surgery and urology resident at Ohio State. Then, in 1999, flag football's governing body decreed that no player could compete for the national championship more than 5 times. There's some disagreement as to whether this is the Paul Arnold rule, but Paul Arnold suspects as much. It wasn't a big deal until I started winning and winning and winning, he says. All right, fast forward almost 20 years, and the now 50-something Arnold seems to be retired from the highest levels of flag football, so far as I can tell. So, Stefan, probably no gold medal in his future, but they should clearly employ him as some sort of analyst, coordinator. But he is still a practicing urologist, and I found this clip of him on the local news in Florida in a segment about prostate cancer.
My only advice to men is listen to their bodies. And if they hear or feel something different, especially in their urinary system, then they should have an open and honest discussion with their physician.
That seems like good advice to me, Stefan.
Yeah, good advice, especially as you head toward your 50s, Josh.
What is your Paul Arnold?
Last month, Shenandoah University in Winchester, Virginia, alerted the media that a junior safety on the football team named Haley Van Voorhees might make history. ESPN dispatched a camera crew to Shentel Stadium for Shenandoah's game against Juniata on September 23rd. The Washington Post was on hand, too. And in the first quarter of what would be a 48-7 win, the 5'6", 145-pound Van Voorhees played 1 snap, registering a hurry on the stat sheet. Media across the country reported that Van Voorhees was the first female non-kicker to play in an NCAA game. It's an extraordinary accomplishment for women everywhere, Tracy Fitzsimmons, the school's first female president, told the Post. Van Voorhees can play. She was All-State honorable mention in Virginia as a high school junior, and she was recruited by several D3 schools. But it turned out that she wasn't the first non-kicker woman to suit up in an NCAA game. The day after Van Voorhees took the field, the website D3football.com reported that 2 weeks earlier, on September 9th, 5'6", 150-pound defensive back Taylor Kraut of Fitchburg State in Massachusetts recorded 1 assist on a tackle in a 32-3 loss to Vermont State Castleton. Kraut's football bio on the Fitchburg State website pictures her in uniform, wearing eye black, and dangling a purse from her right hand and a pair of dress shoes from her left. I couldn't find any media mentions of Kraut's apparent first, which was just as well, because according to the website of the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington, on October 1st of 2022, Kraut recorded a solo tackle in a 72-2 loss to Linfield University. But even that wasn't the first. The day after D3Football.com's scoop about Kraut playing for Fitchburg, the same site posted this video.
And now we'll have Chris Francis check in, and Maria del Carmen Sacristian Benje will also check in for the Engineers. Final 66 seconds. Benje is all alone on the far side. It's victory formation for the Engineers. Nicholas will take a knee.
The Engineers are the Worcester Polytechnic Institute Engineers, and that was the end of their 38-6 win over the Coast Guard on November 6th, 2021. Benje, a 5'5", 145-pound senior wide receiver, came on for the last 2 snaps of the game. You heard that it was victory formation. And I think the "oh, come on" in the clip at the very end might be someone hoping that WPI would run a play for her, not just take a knee. The non-kicker tag here is important because there have been more than a few women kickers in college football. The first to play and score is believed to be Liz Heaston of Willamette University in Salem, Oregon, who made 2 of 4 extra points in 1997. Katie Nida of New Mexico was the first woman to score in a D1 game in 2003. Sarah Fuller of Vanderbilt, the first to do so in a Power 5 game in 2020. And on the same Saturday that Van Voorhees played for Shenandoah, kickers India Polfus of Shaw University and Leilani Armenta of Jackson State became the first 2 women to play for HBCU teams. And here is another, Josh, certified woman college football first. The first woman to play in a college football game who is also a rated tournament Scrabble player. She is Juniper Schwartzman, a first-year kicker at Grinnell College in Iowa, who on September 30th, in the third quarter of an eventual 34-16 win over Lawrence College, attempted and made an extra point. According to a terrific story in the Grinnell student newspaper, The Scarlet and Black, by Zach Spindler-Crage, Schwartzman wound up on the football team after the head coach, Brent Barnes, asked the women's soccer coach, Kirsten Koster, for a recommendation for a kicker who would become the first woman to play football at Grinnell. There's something about Juniper that made me think she would say yes, Koster said. Schwartzman hadn't kicked a football before, but she contacted the coach, practiced the night before a tryout, and a week later made her PAT. The Scarlet and Black story noted that in addition to playing soccer, basketball, tennis, and volleyball in high school, Schwartzman learned to play 7 musical instruments, including the French horn, plans to study physics and environmental studies at Grinnell, and then get a PhD in renewable energy research, will play basketball at Grinnell, and, drumroll, plays Scrabble. Hat tip to my former colleague and Grinnell, Iowa native friend, Evan Ramstad, who forwarded me the story for obvious reasons. I had no idea that Schwartzman was a kicker because she just started kicking, but I did know that she played Scrabble. She competed in a few rated tournaments when she was in middle school, and in 9th grade in 2020 played in an online high school championship that I organized during COVID. She finished 4-8, tough field. Her dad, Peter, is an expert-level Scrabbler who has played since the 1990s. Congrats to Juniper on breaking the Scrabble kicker glass ceiling, and I hope she returns to competitive Scrabble someday. She'll need to if she wants to be known as the best Scrabble-playing place kicker or place-kicking Scrabble player of all time. The competition is not just me. There's also former sports writer Andy Glockner, who kicked for Penn in the 1990s. The three of us definitely need to get together for some Scrabble kicking, Scrabble kicking like chess boxing.
Your agenda is obvious, as there is no kicking, as far as I know, in flag football. And flag football for women is rising, as amply documented in our earlier segment. You're just trying to, wheedle your way in there to, oppose the cause.
I am all in favor of the cause, Josh, if the cause is more kickers who play competitive Scrabble.
That is our show for today. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. To listen to past shows and subscribe or just reach out, go to slate.com/hangup. You can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the show and to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. For Stefan Fatsis, I'm Josh Levin. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thanks for listening.
It's time to get your checking account to zero with free checking from PenFed. That's zero ATM fees, zero balance requirements, and zero time spent waiting for your paycheck to direct deposit because you can receive it up to 2 days early. Open your account with just $25 and see how big zero can be. Apply online today at PenFed.org/free checking. Early direct deposit eligibility may vary between pay periods and timing of payers' funding. To receive any advertised product, you must become a member of PenFed, insured by NCUA.